Welcome back, friends, to part 2 of our farm story. I'm excited to show you more of the harvest. Let's go!
That afternoon, he went back to the field. Not with the same energy as before, not with the same optimism, but with something better, with a determination that is born not from enthusiasm, but from decision, with the quiet awareness that giving up was not an option, because there were lives that depended on his steps. He began to clean. He began to rebuild. And as he worked, something strange began to happen. As he cleared the debris, as he moved the earth churned up by the flood, Elias began to notice something. The soil, it was different. The floods had brought silt, rich, dark sediment full of minerals that came down from the mountains above. The earth that remained was not the same earth as before. It was better. It was deeper. It was more alive. Old Don Aurelio, the oldest man in the village and the one who had seen the most in his nearly 90 years, passed by Elias's land one day and stopped to look. "Son," he said, pressing his knuckles into the dark soil, "do you know what you have here?" "Losses," answered Elias without stopping his work. The old man shook his head and smiled. "You have the best soil in the valley, son. The storm brought you what your neighbors don't have and won't have for years. Seeds in this ground won't grow, they'll explode." Elias went still. He looked at the earth, the same earth he had cursed, the same earth he had wept over, the same earth that had made him ask why. And for the first time since the storm, he felt something that was not resignation, nor forced hope, nor Sunday faith. He felt certainty. The storm had not come to destroy him. It had come to prepare him. Elias planted. With every seed he buried in that renewed earth, he also planted something inside himself. Patience, trust, a faith that was no longer theoretical, but practical, that no longer lived in Sundays, but in Tuesdays at 5 in the morning, when the body wanted to rest and the soul chose to rise. Santiago, his eldest son, began rising with him. Without anyone asking him to, without anyone explaining the lesson. He simply watched his father work, and something in him decided it wanted to become that kind of man. Lucia brought water, Rosa brought food at midday, and suddenly what had been an individual tragedy had become a family construction. The months passed, and when the harvest came, the entire village talked about it. Elias's crops grew in a way no one in that region had seen in many years. The corn was tall, thick, abundant, the vegetables gleaming, the earth generous beyond any expectation. Elias sold more than he had ever sold in a single season. He paid his debts, he rebuilt the shed, but larger and stronger. He bought the tools he had always needed and never been able to afford. And in the middle of all of this, he heard about Marcos. Marcos, the man who had not suffered the storm, the man of high ground and speeches about preparation, Marcos had taken the ease of that season to relax, to spend, to trust too heavily that things would always be easy for him. He had not renewed his channels, he had not improved his soil, he had not invested in his tools. And when a plague came that year, a small plague that any well-maintained field would have resisted, Marcos's field did not resist it. He lost nearly half his harvest. It wasn't total ruin, but it was enough to silence him. Elias did not rejoice in Marcos's fall. That was not what he had learned, but he did understand something with a clarity that was both painful and beautiful at the same time. The suffering he had lived through had forced him to strengthen what Marcos's comfort had left unattended. One night, late in the autumn, when the harvest was already stored away and the cold was beginning to remind the world that rest was also part of the cycle, Elias walked out alone into the field. He carried no tools. He carried no practical purpose. He carried only the weight of everything he had lived through and the quiet need to find a place to set it down. He knelt on the ground, the same ground that had made him suffer, the same ground that had made him doubt, the same ground that then filled him with abundance beyond what he had asked for. And he spoke. Not with the ordered words of a memorized prayer, but with the broken, honest words of a man who finally understands. "Lord," he said, with a voice cracked but steady, "I thanked you when things went well, but I never thanked you for what shaped me most. I never thanked you for the storm. I never thanked you for the hunger of those months. I never thanked you for Marcos humiliating me in the square, because without that humiliation, I would never have asked myself if I was truly doing things right." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Thank you for breaking me, because you forced me to build me better. Thank you for taking away what I thought I needed, because in losing it, I discovered what I truly had. Thank you for the silence when I asked why, because that silence taught me to find my own answers." The wind passed through the dry stalks of the already harvested corn. The sky was full of stars, and Elias, kneeling in the darkness, felt something that words can barely contain. The peace of the man who finally understands that nothing he lived through was a mistake, not even the pain. Especially the pain. The years passed. Santiago grew and became a man who worked the earth with his father's same dedication, but with greater knowledge, because Elias had taught him not only how to plant, but how to understand the soil, not only how to survive storms, but how to search within them for what they deposit. Lucia became a teacher. She taught at the village school for more than 30 years, and those who knew her say that her greatest lesson was not in mathematics or letters, but in perseverance. She told her students the same thing her father had taught her, without ever saying it in words. What breaks you, if you allow it, also forms you. Marcos and Elias, with time, became friends. It was a quiet friendship, built on the respect that only two men can have who have failed in front of each other and chosen to remain standing. Marcos never formally apologized for his words in the square, but one afternoon he arrived with his tools at Elias's land and began working without saying anything. And Elias let him. Because there are apologies that are not spoken, they are demonstrated. Rosa grew old gracefully, as good earth ages, deeper, richer, more capable of sustaining life. And in her final years, when the children were grown and the house smelled of grandchildren and time well lived, Elias would sometimes look at her with the same gaze as the early years, as if he could not believe the world had been generous enough to give him her. One day, his oldest grandson, a boy of 8 named Mateo, asked him, "Grandfather, which was the best year of your life?" Elias thought. He looked at his old hands. He looked at the field that kept living generation after generation, and he answered, "The year of the storm." The boy frowned. "But wasn't that the year you lost everything?" Elias smiled. "Yes, and it was also the year I found the most important thing I had." This story is not only about Elias. This story is yours. It belongs to every person who has faced a storm they never asked for, who has lost a harvest they didn't deserve to lose, who has knelt on dry ground and asked in silence or out loud, "Why me?" The answer doesn't always come in the moment of the question. Sometimes it comes months later, when the silt the flood left behind turns out to be the most fertile ground you've ever touched. Sometimes it comes years later, when you watch your children grow with a strength they never would have had if you hadn't suffered first. Sometimes it comes in the eyes of a person who says to you, "What you lived through didn't destroy you, it built you." God did not promise that life would be easy. He promised that you would not be alone in it. And sometimes being accompanied doesn't mean someone removes your burden. It means someone walks with you while you carry it, and that when you reach the other side, you discover that what you were carrying was not a punishment, it was a preparation. The farmer who thanked God for his problems was not a man without pain. He was a man who learned to look pain directly in the face and find in it a more powerful question than, "Why is this happening to me?" The question was, "What is this happening to prepare me for?" That question changes everything. Now I want to ask you something. What storm are you living through right now? What loss are you carrying that you still can't understand? What situation has made you look up at the sky and ask why without receiving an answer? Because if there is one thing Elias's story teaches us, it is this. The answer doesn't always come before the harvest. Sometimes you have to plant again in the ground that broke you to discover that same ground was the one that was going to carry you furthest. Today, before you close this video, I ask just one thing of you. Write in the comments, what is your storm? What is the problem you haven't yet been able to give thanks for? You don't have to resolve it today. You don't have to understand it today. Just write it. Because there is something powerful in naming what weighs on you, and there is something even more powerful in a community of people who have felt exactly what you feel and who are still standing. If this story moved you, share it with someone who is in their worst moment. Not because it has easy answers, but because sometimes all a person needs is to know their storm has purpose. Like this video if you believe pain can teach. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Stories that don't promise life will be easy, but that remind you that you have everything you need to walk through it. And remember, you are not what you lost. You are what you decided to do after losing it. See you in the next video.